Welcome to Mountaineer Farm Talk. My name is JJ Barrett, and I'm the Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources here in Wood County. And of course, I've got my co-host, John David Johnson.
Hey. How are
He's
y'all
down
doing
in
today?
Jackson County. Good. And then I've got Evan Wilson. He's down in Cabell and Wayne. What's up, Evan?
Everything's looking good today down here in Milton this morning.
Good. I am glad to have everyone with us today. Of course, we've had a beautiful day yesterday for celebrating Veterans Day, but really good warm temperatures.
JJ.
About safety and health.
JJ,
He's from the.
you were kind of lagging there. Your connectivity
Okay.
wasn't very strong.
We're gonna be talking about chainsaws.
Something's not working.
Oh, we can hear you.
There you go. I can't hear you very well.
I think you're good to go.
Patrick, we're just. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. How are you doing this morning? Welcome to the
I'm
show.
doing good. Thank you.
Well, let's just start right off. Give us a little bit of your background of your experience in as far as timber management, tree cutting. I know that we have a lot of people here in West Virginia that cut firewood. Give us a little bit of your background, Pat.
My background started many years ago. Got my first trees back in the 70s with my dad, and had a tree service in Morgantown, Clarksburg, Fairmont area for a number of years, and cut timber for a number of years, worked in sawmills for about 28 years, and just been involved in the wood business since basically I was a small kid, and just followed it all the way up the ladder. And now I'm working in the safety end of the logging and for extension, safety and health, and actually really enjoying it, trying to make a difference.
Good. So as part of your job, you actually work with some of the companies that are out there, the sawmills, or actually people out in the woods that are cutting down the timber.
Yeah, I work with the logging crews, and part of the research project is I go out and we'll see what they're doing in terms of being compliant with all the OSHA regs.
Oh, okay. We wanted to maybe focus a little today more on some of our homeowners. I know that as I said, anyone that has property is going to have to eventually maybe get a chainsaw with down trees if there's a storm, and firewood. On the farm, I know that we're always cleaning up fence lines, trying to get rid of some dead trees. What kind of safety equipment is pretty essential for some of our homeowners?
Well, first and foremost, there's a set of chaps, and whether you buy a set of actual chaps or the pair of saw pants, anything from gloves, hard hat, anything to protect your ears, protect your eyes, because eventually, if you do it on a regular basis, eventually something's going to happen. And having that PPE, as we call it, is really going to make a huge difference. Because a lot of times we do a lot of this cutting by ourselves, and when we're by ourselves, we need to just be extra cautious.
Yeah, what about some of our and I know that maybe the farmers need this advice more than anyone. What about for our hearing protection and our hands and things like that for safety in the woods?
My favorite thing to wear, and I brought one with me, and you'd be hard pressed to get a lot of old farmers to wear this. I realize that because I work with some old farmers, but if you can see this right here, it's got the face shield on it. It's got the hard hat, and it's got the muffs on the inside. And of course,
Oh, okay.
it's, I bought this at Leslie Equipment down the interstate, John Deere dealer. Everybody's familiar with Leslie Equipment in West Virginia, but you can find them at Lowe's and those kind of places. I imagine I see your hat, Rural King. I imagine I have it at Rural King. Easy to find, kind of warm to wear in the summertime. But if you ever had a limb come down on you, you'd be very thankful to have that on your head. And, but I look at the earmuffs. My earmuffs are my favorite. I'm not big on earplugs anymore. Had to wear them for years in the sawmill, and I just find earmuffs a lot more comfortable.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah, because I've got that maybe down our list a little bit, but one of the biggest dangers especially for maybe someone that's inexperienced running a chainsaw is kickback. Maybe because you talk about what kickback is and how that we can prevent accidents from happening.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do this I kind of have this wrote down. Put it up there, see if you can see it. I don't know if you can see it or not. Anyway, I'll try it. Can you see the saw pretty good in the background?
Yeah.
If we can or not. But anyway, here's a saw. Obviously, we cut on two planes. We cut on the top of the bar, we cut on the bottom of the bar. This here is where you get your kickback from. It's when you come in contact with the wood. And when you do that, the saw is turning away, or excuse me, the chain is turning in a way that it's turning opposite way you want it to go, and it forces itself back. So instead of pulling it into the wood, it's pushing it away from the wood. And that saw right there turns it over 10,000 RPM. So you can imagine if you hit that force with the force of that chain turning, it kicks it back. And when it kicks it back toward the person operating the saw. Pretty nasty at times, but having a chain brake, a functioning chain brake, makes a huge difference because it's an inertia on that chain brake, and it usually stops it pretty quick, but not every time.
Yeah. Well, maybe let me kick let me kick back. Let me start back at the beginning here for people that are inexperienced, or maybe someone that is just, because we, of course, JD and Evan and I have people that call the office all the time. They've just bought property, or maybe their parents are getting older and they've moved back in the area. What should someone look for as far as their chainsaw? How big of a chainsaw? How big of a bar? Some of the brand name. There's so much information out there. Can you help us sort some of that out a little bit?
Yeah, there's like you said, there are a lot of saws out there, and they promise a lot of things. But obviously, the smaller the saw you have, the easier it's going to be to handle. I mean, if you're going to lug around a 15-pound chainsaw just cutting out, mold floor rows and autumn olive along a fence row, probably not the best kind of saw you want. What you want is one, I would say, with a bar that's 16 inches or shorter. And this is my preference. Obviously, this is going to be different for other people, but my preference is 16 inches or shorter, a fully functioning chain brake. And the chain brake is the handle on top that you can, obviously, when you start a saw, you engage the chain brake so it doesn't move when you start it. A chain catcher on the bottom, which is, you can see that, there's a chain catcher. It's an aluminum piece right there. You can see where my finger's pointing at right there. And that there, when the chain does fly off, because eventually it will fly off, that catches it. And what it does, it wraps it up a little bit so it doesn't tear into you as bad as it could if there was not one on there. So, and that's actually a piece that gets worn down pretty quickly because it's aluminum. And it's real easy not to pay attention to that. But at the same time, you figure it out pretty quick when you don't pay attention to it and it comes back and gets you. Because I've done, being in this business for the last basically 40 years, I've sewed up a few people that weren't paying that much attention. And the little things like that cost just dollars at a saw shop is money well spent. And obviously too, with that, you want a fully functioning handle on here. I've worked with some saws that have broken handles on them. And that handle is actually a safety feature also. It guards your hand while you're running the saw in case something comes back on it. So those features right there is what you really need to look for in a saw when you're going to purchase one.
Is there any preference to, when we were talking before the program started, you're kind of a Husqvarna fan, which is cool. Is there, I know that maybe Husky and Steel and maybe some of the newer Echoes are more geared towards professional loggers. But is there maybe a brand that our homeowners should avoid, that they're just going to have a lot of problems with, and should just avoid those brands?
Well, one thing about the Husky, the Steel, the Echo, Sax Dolmar, John Sered, they all make a homeowner line. I call them a homeowner line. It's not the professional line where, when you jump up to a professional saw, you're adding a lot of dollars too. But they make all those companies make lines of just homeowner saws. So that'd be good. But there are a few saws out there, and you all might have seen them. I don't know the exact brand name, but they're made in China. The case is a bright blue color. It's not Makita or anything like that, which is Japanese made. But there's some of them out there that are very cheap, and they come in some saws that are some pretty big size. But I've talked to a couple of guys who have bought them just for the sheer fact that they were cheaper and have had a lot of trouble with them on the safety end of it, performance end of it, and they're just not worth the money, in my experience.
What about some of your battery saws? There's battery saws out there that I've never seen before till the last couple of years. I saw one of my buddy had it, and of course I picked on him about it a little bit. It's a battery saw. Then I kind of actually used it, and I actually kind of like it. What do you think about some of the battery saws for smaller stuff?
Well, I actually used a few of them too, and I was very impressed. The limiting feature on a battery saw is the price. They're still extremely expensive. But I have some friends who are arborists, and they climb trees all day, and they'll go, let's see, what did he tell me? He usually changes his battery at dinner time, and he changes his battery at quitting time, so it's ready for the next morning. So he can get through, and this is a person climbing around a tree doing not topping, but doing pruning, takedowns, that kind of thing, removals. So they do have their place. They're just a little cost prohibitive right now, but it is amazing. If you've seen them, battery, about as big as my hands are right here, there's a lot of juice to them, and they do have some longevity to them, which makes it nice.
Well, that was nice, especially, and they're lighter weight, and you don't have to worry about pulling.
Exactly.
Yeah. Pat, let's maybe
really
hit another
hard on your joints.
Yeah. Another safety feature, and maybe this is kind of a really big deal, even for some of our experienced people that cut firewood, and that's how to fell a tree, especially if we get a pretty good sized tree. Can you maybe talk about the safety procedures with cutting, a pretty good sized tree down, maybe a dead tree or one that you want a good size when you want to turn into firewood or even for logs?
Well, it's kind of hard to address that one completely without actually being in the woods and showing somebody. And I realize that we're on a computer right now. But the best thing in figuring out how to fell a tree is first determine the lean. Obviously, if it's leaning in the opposite direction you want to fell it, there's a lot of factors involved to get that tree to go into its correct lay that you want it to go into. Open face notch is the standard procedure. You take a notch at about 70 degrees, about a third of the way, quarter of the way into the tree, which obviously is the direction you're going to fell it in. That notch is going to be facing in the direction, they call it, into the lay that you want to fell it in. And most people now, professionals that is, most people, they'll bore cut a tree. And what I mean by that is, in behind your notch, you bore in with your saw, and you set the width of your hinge. Your hinge, obviously, I think everybody that's ever run a saw knows what a hinge is, but that is the fiber that's left on the tree that determines the direction of your fall. Just like opening a door, the hinge allows it to stay attached to the stump, and it'll come back toward the back of the tree. Do it on the other side if it's a big tree, and then it'll leave a space, probably like that, maybe that deep in the back of holding wood. And what that allows you to do is allows you to be out of that back cut, hit that piece that you have left on the back of the tree, and you can get away quicker. So as you hit that back part of the cut, you're already moving in a direction towards safety. You're 45-degree angle away from the back of the tree. And I hate to go into a lot of detail because I don't want to give anybody false confidence that, oh yeah, I heard it on a computer, so I'm good to go. But there's a lot of factors involved with it. Just from it's been a rough late summer, early fall in the logging business. There's a guy killed just last week, and he had been a cutter for years on end. So, grapevine on top of the tree, leaning against other trees, dead wood in the tree, that kind of thing. A lot of things you need to look at before you even fire the saw up. And having a PPE on helps you. But if you have something big come down, it's, it probably would have been prevented a lot easier by not just even tackling it. But
yeah, and go ahead.
Down my neck of the woods out here in Wayne and Cabell counties, we just got done with a pretty big ice storm back here back in February and March. Is there anything our homeowners, farm owners could prepare, maybe how to identify those dangerous trees that may come down later for this winter and upcoming storms?
Yeah, obviously the easiest way to identify them is in summertime and they're losing their leaves and, you start, the bark starts slumping off, that kind of thing. But in the wintertime, if you see trees with a lot of limbs breaking off of them, you see the bark falling off of it, that's a good wintertime identification to show you that there's some hazards going on. And in order to, mitigate some of them hazards, sometimes it's best to walk away from them and maybe call somebody that has a little more experience. And I realize a lot of farmers, and you all know farmers, and I'm one myself, kind of half-baked. But they're very proud people, and a lot of times, and I'm speaking from my own experience, a lot of times they think their way is the best way and they're going to take care of it. And then on the other hand of that, sometimes working on it with a piece of equipment rather than a saw being underneath the tree might be the best way, especially if it's starting to come over. You can get a dozer, you can get a big tractor and just push them over with a bucket if you have that ability, that kind of thing. And not even put yourself in that position.
Now, with that said, talking about pushing them over, if a guy was going to come in and cut about 2 acres there he wanted to put in pasture, would that probably be the most economical way to kind of push some of these big trees over, and then that way you can get that root ball out to replant there? Or would the grinding be better?
Well, here's my opinion on that. Right now, the wood business is in an uphill. It's just doing very well right now. So if I had the ability to sell 2 acres of decent timber and you say you had some big trees on it, I would actually try to contact the logger first, whether it be through the county forester or service forester, wherever their titles are, and see if you can get them in there. And granted, 2 acres is a small patch of timber in order to be economical to set up a logging operations. But if it's got some decent timber on it, you might be able to have them cut it. If they have an excavator or decent sized dozer, they can push the stumps out for you too, at an extra cost, of course. But that might be your best option.
Well, see, the reason I said 2 acres, because, we're that West Virginia farm like mine, I have 60 acres of, woods, but I have about 2 to probably 5 that's flat inside those woods that, I could utilize then afterwards. So, you always have those small areas that you can say, okay, well, we'll leave the rest of this in timber, but, go ahead and take that out while we're cutting.
Yeah, I know one of y'all said you were from Milton. And I was on a job, actually numerous times on a job outside of Milton, where the farmer cleared, I think it was 200 acres of woods to make pasture for his animals. And so there are logging outfits that fit this niche. Granted, that's a big patch of timber right there, 200 acres. But at the same time, these guys are set up and willing to go into smaller patches just to do that kind of work. And if it's flat, that's like Christmas morning for a logger, because you don't find it flat in West Virginia while you're cutting timber.
For sure.
Yeah, with that, sorry.
Pat, just to follow up on the question, what John David was talking about, what for farmers and homeowners, what situation should they go ahead and call a professional? What kind of tree would they, realize they're in over their head and call a professional to take it down?
Well, the first one I would say would be the ash tree. Emerald ash borer is everywhere in the state. And when you finally notice that your tree's dead, it's at the point where it's in pretty bad shape. And at that point, I would be very hard pressed to tell anybody to cut it on their own. That would be a good place. If a tree is intermixed with wires, doesn't matter if it's telephone or cable or electric, if it's leaning against a building or a house or it's over a road, that kind of thing. I've been on enough jobs where people are trying to swing it against the lean and it landed up on a hard top road, and what happens, you got to stop traffic and that kind of thing. And luckily nobody's ever hurt, but at the same time, just situations where if you're nervous before you even put the first cut in that tree, you might be over your head already. And I think points like that, it might be worthwhile to have somebody else take a look at it.
And you want to make sure, especially if they're leaning towards your house, that those cutters or arborists or whatever are licensed and bonded, right?
Correct. Yeah. And usually that's, if you call a reliable and especially word of mouth type arborist, a neighbor or something told you about it and you trust that neighbor, then yeah, that's going to be one of the first things. Are they fully insured? Is there, if they show up with a pickup truck that's half rusted out and the chainsaws are falling out the back when they pull in, I'd be a little nervous about that. But if you got a professional arborist and he's got a bucket truck, he's got a nice sign on the truck, he's got his business license number on the truck, yeah, I'd be a little happier at that point. Because
I guess I'm not set up to be an arborist then.
No, no, this is, I've been in West Virginia many, many years, but there's every gamut of the population out there, and I think half of them think they know how to do tree work. So, but I'm not trying to put anybody down or disparage anybody, but it's when you're in over your head, you know it pretty quickly, and it's not the time to figure that out. It's not when you're in your back cut and your saw is pinched, and all of a sudden you're like, what do I do now? Yeah. My kids and family are.
Yeah. Speaking of that, Pat, give us some tips on preventing what we call saw pinch, whether you're cutting a tree or a limb that's part of the tree. A lot of times I get in trouble when I've got a tree that's down, but there's some limbs that are against the ground. And then when I go to cut, then I get my saw pinched. What are some tips to prevent that from happening?
Well, the first way, and I think the simplest way, is just kind of stand back and look and see where the tension is. Where's your tension and compression at? There's obviously, if it's in a bow like this, your tension is going to be on the top. So you want to release some of that. You want to do very little cutting on the top. You want to come from the bottom. On the bigger trees, you can get your part on the top. You can set plastic wedges and you can relieve some of that, or just at least hold it open. Because it all depends on the position you're in. I mean, if you're on the side of a hill and you're in a bad position, there's a lot to take into account at that point. But if you're just cutting a tree that fell over and it's on decent ground, yeah, you probably want to do most of your cutting from the bottom, because that's going to release the tension a lot quicker. As that wood compresses, it's released better from the bottom than it is from the top, obviously.
Okay.
And while you're felling a tree, the easiest way to keep the tree from setting back is obviously, as you set with your hinge you want to set some wedges too. Obviously plastic wedges. If you have a choice, you want plastic wedges.
Yeah, I know that we have a lot of people in West Virginia that cut firewood. What's probably our best species for burnt cutting and burning firewood? What's available out there?
Every hardwood species is available in West Virginia. My personal favorites are red oak and white oak, hickory, cherry. To a certain extent, cherry burns up pretty quickly, but a lot of people like cherry because there's so much of it. And for what cherry's worth right now, it probably is pretty good as firewood. But you also locust. I know we have taken down many a row of fence at our place and put in treated poles or treated posts and did high tensile wire. So all those old posts we put in a pile and we'd cut them up and burn for firewood. It made excellent firewood. So a lot of species out there, you want to stay away from the poplar, the cucumber, the basswood, that kind of thing, some soft maple that burn up a lot quicker. They all burn, but those species burn up a lot quicker. They don't make the ash like the other ones do, the coals like the other ones do.
Yeah, speaking of, you're talking about some value. What as for our landowners, what species are kind of high valued right now? If someone would come in and do some timbering on your property, and which species are kind of at the bottom of the barrel?
Very popular right now is white oak. Poplar has really gone through the roof. I think it's valued more than it's actually worth, but that's my personal opinion.
Really?
Hickory is doing very well. Any kind of locust. I mean, the locust post, the fence business right now is gangbusters. So any kind of locust like that, certain types of pine and that kind of pine, hemlock, spruce, maybe not hemlock, but spruce that goes into that fence business is worth decent money. And at the same token too, pulpwood right now is worth not a lot of money. I will never say it's worth a lot, but it's bringing pretty good money per ton right now, because the outfits in West Virginia that buy that are, they're not at capacity right now in their yards, is what I was just told yesterday. So they're looking for pulpwood. So the traditional ones that are very popular, the red oak and the cherry. Red oak has actually had a little uptick, and cherry a little bit, but not so much. And as probably remembers years ago, cherry was the species of species, and right now it's not so much.
What about black walnut? Is it still pretty
Yeah.
have a lot of high value?
Yeah, black walnut never ceases to amaze me. It's everything from a woods run type log, which is, you can imagine, is full of all kinds of defect, up to the perfectly straight, defect free logs. It's worth a lot of money.
We do have a question from the audience. Dr. Skousen asked, I'm cutting all of the dead ash in my forest and using that as firewood. It seems to burn well if it hasn't been dead for a long time. Any concern with dead ash? I know the loggers don't want ash in their cuts because of its dryness.
Yeah, an ash log that has not been dead very long will still be valuable to a logger. And I'm saying dead very long. I'm not saying 2 years or so it's been standing dead where it's started to get punky and that kind of thing. But there is value to ash still if it has not been dead very long. And there are some places in West Virginia, and I've seen some up in the Mon National Forest where there is a little bit of ash that's still alive. Now, it's just a matter of time before it dies. But that's the kind of thing. If you have it alive right now is the time to cut it, because it's not going to be alive. It's all going to die. So
talking about finding someone to cut that, I mean, for the people that, is listening and said, hey, I got a little white oak, I got a little poplar, maybe a couple walnuts in there. How would they go about finding those loggers in their area that's actually respectable, that's not going to, roll off that nice top log, by their house on the way to the log yard?
Well, the Department of Forestry offers a program, and I might have this a little bit wrong. I think it's called the Landowner Assistance Program, where the forest will actually come in and look. And, I don't know if they actually put a value on your timber anymore. I know years ago they did. I don't know if they do that anymore, but it gives you the opportunity to put it out there. And another way to do it is to call local sawmen. I mean, in West Virginia, you got Northwest Hardwoods, you have Allegheny, Pearson down south. There's a number of bigger outfits in the state and smaller ones that you can contact them directly, and they can send a forester out. And to get the best value out of your timber, call more than one person. It keeps them all honest, and allows a little competition.
And I know they sell it different ways. Some people do 50-50. Some people do, we'll wait till it gets graded and whatever, and do it another way. And some just buy it straight out from you.
Yep.
What in your past history have you seen is kind of the best for the landowner?
I personally, what I like, and this is not the same for everybody, but personally, what I like is when they come in, they cruise your patch of timber and they give you dollar value. So here's what we're going to pay you for your timber. Okay. And it spells it all out in the contract, and everything up front. Okay. Obviously, it's going to be to the benefit of the sawmill, but in a reputable sawmill like some of that I was just mentioning, they're not going to do things that are going to be over and above bad for the landowner. But I think bringing competition in any kind of situation is going to be better for everybody. I do like the contract price where they write you a check.
So you're guaranteed that much money, no matter what.
As long as the check's good.
Yeah. It's always that.
You know what they say, as long as I got checks, there's money to bank, right?
Yeah, buddy. Put on it whatever you want, as long as there's ink in the pen.
Yeah, Pat, I just wanted to add to that. We have a certified forester that works in our area, and that's what I recommend to my farmers and landowners that call me. His company comes in and they cruise the temp. They'll come for free the first time. Then if you want to hire him on, they take a percentage. I don't know, it's like 8 or 10%, but they cruise the timber. They get a value. They give you a printout, and then they get the our 4-H camp went through him, and they gave us 5 bids from different sawmills, and then we took the highest bid. And like you said, we had the however many board feet was broken out in all the different species, and then they wrote us a check before they even logged it. They had a contract and all that stuff. It was well worth it.
Yeah, and I can kind of a little past the scope of what we're talking about, but there's a lot of things you want to see in a contract on a piece of ground too. But that's for another time.
Okay. Oh, I had a question on here about cutting overhead limbs. What's your opinion on that as far as chainsaw safety?
Well, the rule of thumb has always been never above the waist. You can keep the saw below your waist. That's you're better off, because things get a little skatey when you get up high. They make pole saws. They make motorized pole saws. They make electric pole saws. They make obviously hand operated pole saws. The loggers that I deal with, when they're trimming the sides of their log truck before they leave the landing to go to the mill, they run back, not run, but they walk up and down each side of the truck, and they cut off all the little branches that are sticking out, that kind of thing, with a chainsaw on a pole saw. So I would recommend that a lot more than I ever recommend anybody to use anything over their head. I can tell you, I can talk, let's see, it's 10:30 now. I can talk till it gets dark tonight about some of the accidents I've seen with people cutting over their head. So.
Yeah, maybe I sent had a list of questions, and one on there I actually took from one of the extension websites. I can't remember. I think it was Cornell, but around over 30,000 people each year are taken to the emergency room due to injuries from chainsaw operation. Is there some big tips that you can give to our audience? Just some bare bone basics, safety tips about operating a chainsaw, cutting fire, whether it's cutting firewood or trimming trees.
Yeah, definitely so. The first thing I'll mention is probably one of the simplest ones. When you're filing your chain, wear a pair of gloves. And the reason I say that is anybody that files a chain, whether you're filing down the rakers or depth gauge, whatever you want to call it, or the actual cutter tooth, a lot of times you'll slip off. And when you slip off, you don't have gloves on, you take the hide right off your hands. That's a simple one. Next one is, and I've done it myself, but I've seen people do it too, where you're getting, you got firewood on the ground and you stick your foot underneath it so you keep it out of the dirt and you hold it up a little bit, just keeping your body parts away from a moving chain and making sure all your safety features are working. If your chain brake's not working, what it's designed for is never going to save you. If your chain catcher's not working, or it's broken or worn down or whichever, it's not going to help you. But those things, you got overhanging branches, you got dead branches stuck in a tree and you're cutting it. Like I mentioned before, you may be cutting a small tree down, but it's all intertwined with grapevine. That's some safety things right there you need to take a look at. Just be observing everything that goes on around you, because gravity is a terrible enemy when things go south with the tree that's coming down.
Yeah, definitely. I think that sometimes you're talking about some of a dead tree or a pretty good sized tree or a tree that's on a really steep bank. Sometimes we can get in over our head, and we should call in a professional or like you were saying, someone with a dozer or a track hoe or something that would come in and take that tree out. It'd be a lot safer.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah,
Now,
and obviously,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now,
I was just going to say that, when you are looking at those, evaluating the situation, I always, kind of pick different running lanes, what I call a running lane, your escape path. Now, I guess, would you want to have more than one, I guess, and do you go in and clear kind of some paths where you can kind of get away before you start in on those trees?
Yeah, most definitely. And on the professional side of it, OSHA does have standards where you're supposed to clear a path at 45-degree angles away from the back of the tree, not directly behind it, but 45-degree angle on either side. You have to be able to get away. And as JJ mentioned, on steep ground, that kind of thing, it may be a little difficult to do that. But on very steep ground, the tree is not, I mean, the tree is going to be falling away from you. So that's one benefit. But you always have to know where to go when that tree starts falling. There's no going back. I mean, if it gets wrapped up in grapevine and twists, 90 degrees or 180 degrees, and it starts to come down, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's coming at me, kind of thing. You need to have a plan of action. You don't want to figure it out in the time in that couple seconds when the tree is actually coming towards you.
And I noticed, definitely when you get these old dead trees, that I've cut one. So when I put up fence through the woods, I go in and cut every tree that's dead or in decline, because they're just going to end up on your fence. So I cut one 2 years ago, and when I cut it, it broke into 3 different pieces when it was falling down. So this one went this way, this one went that way, and the top hung in a grapevine, and it was just kind of dangling for a minute. So they'll surprise you, won't they?
It'll tighten you up pretty quick. I guarantee you that. I've done it long enough, but they, I mean, just paying attention to your surroundings is probably the most important thing. If you're cutting like on a morning, let's say a morning like this morning, bright, sunshiny, rained all night, but yesterday it was windy. It was very windy. Why would you want to be, if it's not something that needs to be done right now, why would you be out there doing it? Looking at things like that. If it's really windy and that wind's blowing the opposite direction that you want to cut the trees in, there's a factor right there that you really can't control. So maybe save yourself for another day and do it on those days where the wind isn't so much of a factor.
I'd say definitely to continue on with that conversation, Pat, especially when we have, like Evan was talking about, remnants from a hurricane or a bad storm come through, and there's trees down and electric lines down and everything. And then, a lot of the weekend warriors come out with their chainsaws ready to go at it. What are some safety tips for that, especially if you've got several people with their chainsaws out cutting at the same time?
Well, the first thing I would say to something like that is just stand back and assess the situation before you just dive right into it. I can just give you a couple of scenarios where things went south when people didn't do that, but just assess things. And you were talking about the tension or getting your saw pinched on something you didn't realize it was that tight. Things like that. A big tree comes down and you're cutting it, and all of a sudden it starts moving towards you, or it starts breaking out the side, or just try to assess the situation a little bit. And if it's small stuff you can do, cutting off some branches, that's one thing. But dealing with wood that weighs thousands of pounds and you're putting yourself in that position, you really need to have a plan of action to where you need to step back and say, this is really above what I can do. And then you need to, find somebody that will be able to do it. But putting yourself in that situation with a little bit of forethought, I think is a whole lot better than charging in that situation with every bit of PPE and a new saw and great attitude, but just maybe sometimes stepping back and looking, and maybe even praying that things will go well too, would be a good thing to do.
I start off every morning with a prayer, because you need all the help you can get. But tell us about the fatalities. How many fatalities do we see every year in West Virginia from falling trees? I know we lost a logger 2 years ago, or this year, Mr. Bush. He's a good man. Mm-hmm. And what do we see around the state on these fatalities?
In loggers, we see between 6 and 7 a year. That's what West Virginia averages. If you want to go into statistics, logging is probably 20 times more dangerous than the next profession, something like that. It's up there with the most dangerous ones there are. And I'm talking about people losing their lives that are just seasoned, experienced, the whole 9 yards, and they lose their lives too. And it's, I'm not going to dwell on it, but I was crushed in a logging accident years ago, and I learned pretty quickly from that one and never put myself in that position again. But there's a lot of factors out there sometimes you don't even notice until the tree starts coming down, and that's where you need to look. I have a very good friend of mine that's a timber cutter, and as he's cutting one tree, he's looking at the next one down the line, because you got that distance you can see, and you can come up with a plan of attack, a safer plan of attack.
Yeah, so, going back to some of our talks just about the saws in general, Pat. Um, we know what, if we're going to shell out 300 or 400 bucks for a saw, I want it to last a long time. What is your opinion on whether we should use ethanol-free gas, and is it actually that hard on some of our saws?
This stuff right here. I don't get any money from them by putting this out there, but if your saw is going to be run every now and then and sit for a long time, regular gas is not going to be good for it unless you stabilize it. Obviously, I think we all know that. But this stuff here without the ethanol in it, I mean, I buy it. I buy a lot. I buy it by the case. So it really makes an advantage. I think it really makes an advantage takes advantage of the longevity that this stuff allows to happen. Like this saw that I was looking at right there, or showing you a little while ago. That saw there costs around $800. And if I can just go out and buy this pre-mix without ethanol in it, it's never touched mixed gas before. Mixed gas meaning I bought the gas at a gas station and put 2-cycle oil in it. I don't touch it in that one. My older saws, yeah, I use the other. But if it's going to sit for a while, the ethanol and the gas is going to tear it up unless you stabilize it.
Yeah, and speaking of some of the older saws, I know that in like our local bulletin board or on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, you can find some of these older saws. Are they worth the money, considering a lot of them don't have a lot of safety features of our newer saws?
If it does not have the safety features, in my opinion, they're not worth any money. Right there. Some of the older saws, like I run some older saws, some bigger saws that I can run bigger bars on. They have the chain catcher, they have the chain brake, they have the good handle on the back. So I would not be afraid to buy something like that. But the bigger the saw you get, the higher the CC the saw is, the heavier it's going to be, the harder it's going to be to lug around. And to be honest with you, the more tired you're going to get, that much quicker by having them. You can get just as much chain speed and torque out of a newer saw than you can out of an older one, because obviously some of these saws are now chipped and that kind of thing. So they adjust to the situation that you're in, whether it be elevation or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I guess I always get frustrated when my saw starts to get dull, but about how often should we sharpen our chainsaws, and how do you know when it's time to get a new chain?
Actually, I'll address the new chain part first. On every cutter tooth on a saw chain is a line. It's not only a line that shows you the angle that tooth needs to be filed at, but when you get to that line, you're done. You need to replace that chain. I sharpen the chain whenever it needs it. And I know that doesn't give you an answer, but if you're working with real dirty wood, it's been drugged through the mud, that kind of stuff, you're probably going to be sharpening fairly often. Maybe every couple logs you're going to be sharpening that saw. I mean, if you're doing nice clean wood, you may have to just sharpen it once every couple days if you're not cutting that much. But I like to hit mine every morning. I like to hit mine before I'm done for the day. That way I don't have to worry about it later. And if I have it done at night, then it's good to go the next morning, that kind of thing.
Are you a fan of the old file or the electric chainsaw sharpener?
I brought these with it, and like I said, I don't think the TV or the computer does that great, but I use one of these, or I use one of these, and what these are, it's a round file with a flat file on it. So you're filing I call them rakers, but they're actually, the proper name is a depth gauge. The little tooth that's in front of the cutter tooth, it does them at the same time. So you're always getting the correct height of that tooth every single time. And I know there's guys out there who love to basically file those rakers off because they think the chain will turn faster. There's some circumstances it does, but not always. But this one here also gives you the proper angle. You make this angle right here parallel with your saw bar, and that gives you the correct angle on your sawtooth. And then it also, at the same time, it does your raker to the correct height. And instead of flipping around files and stuff, you just flip this over and you do your other teeth on the other side of the bar, facing the other way at the same time. Pretty slick.
Now you can put these chains on backwards, right?
You want to do a dirty trick to somebody? That's a great thing to do, because everything else is wrong before they look at the chain.
I bought a really cheap saw one time at a yard sale. The little guy was like, it wouldn't cut nothing. It runs perfectly. Like I got to look at him like, you sure you want to sell this saw? He said, yes, I want it off my property. I said, well, I'll give you $20 for it. And took home a nice steel chainsaw that day. $20.
That's a good deal. There's bargains everywhere.
But I told him, I said, I think the chain's on backwards. He's like, oh no. I couldn't convince him. So I took it home, turned it around, cut perfectly.
Yeah. I visit a lot of log jobs in a day's time, week's time. And that's always a great practical joke they love to do. So they'll get, because every guy that cuts trees has his own saw, has his own way of filing. And they'll throw chain on backwards real quick when they're not paying attention. And you can, they'll get up on the hill and start cutting. You see them, scream out names like, whoa, you dirty sucker, that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, the saw chain obviously is the most important, because if it's not sharp, you're just going to be getting angry and burning through the wood. So to answer your question, JJ, it's just whenever it needs it. And if it's not cutting to your liking and it's cut better before, it's time to stop and put the file to it.
Talk about getting hot.
Hmm?
Oh, I was just going to say, talk about getting hot. That dull chain will make that saw get hot, and will that burn through more oil? We haven't really talked about oil.
I'm not sure how much it would burn through more oil or not, because oil is metered out through the oil tank. So if it's hot or not, I mean, obviously the more heat, and as you already know, your bar oil is right next to your muffler. So it keeps it warm, especially in the wintertime if you don't have a winter grade bar oil. So a little bit more heat is just going to make it, what's the word? Less viscous. Is that the word? Whatever the stickiness of the oil is, it makes it flow better, or viscosity maybe. And so yeah, it would probably make you use a little bit more, because the oil will come out a little more free.
Yeah, as far as you're talking about that, is it hard on your engine, if on your chainsaw motor, if your saw is dull, the chain?
You're working it harder, so you're going to be using it longer to get through your firewood than it would be if you had a sharp chain. So it is definitely more wear and tear, because you just got more time with the saw running. So yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, it is harder on the saw.
Oh, and then another question. A lot of the newer saws, they come with synthetic 2-cycle oil, and they recommend using that. Is it worth the extra money? Is there that much difference between the conventional and the synthetic oil for your mix?
To be honest with you, JJ, I've never used the synthetic. I've always had, because I buy the mix oil by the case, and I'll just buy a case of 2-cycle oil, and it's always just been regular oil. So I've never tried the synthetic. And I'm not sure what they put in the premix. I don't know if it's a synthetic or not, to be honest with you. But the gas that I've mixed myself, I've never used any synthetic.
Evan, we have a question from the audience.
Oh, let me look here. Pull back up here. Can you use old motor oil instead of bar chain oil?
Well, the answer is yes, but I wouldn't, because old oil has all the metal fragments from inside your engine and stuff, real small, obviously, but it's not going to lubricate. It's actually going to start wearing stuff down quicker than if you have regular bar oil that's clean and made for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa she had back in the chat earlier, she had a trimmer with a 6-inch blade on an extension up to 10 feet. And then they use a battery operated trimmer for overhead branches. I guess her father-in-law cut into his knee while trimming trees sometime. That's always bad.
Yeah.
So, was there a question in there? What's okay?
I think just some comments, Pat.
And and he became a state forester.
Oh, okay.
Taxi. Oh, okay. I know who her father was. He's a little older than me.
Yeah, maybe another common question I get, Pat, is, well, this was a few years ago with the ash trees, but I'll have a landowner or homeowner call, and they only have a few, like maybe 6 or 8 trees, like the ashes, or maybe they got some cherries or a patch of black walnut, but just not a whole lot. How do they who could they have come in to would it be worth someone to come in to log those trees? How would they go about trying to sell that timber if they could?
Well, the first thing to do with that little amount of trees, there's not going to be a logger that's going to come in and set up equipment for that few. But an arborist can come in, and a number of the arborists that I know, tree services is usually what people refer to them as, will come in and they'll know somebody. Like they'll deal with a forester on a regular basis. Say, hey, I got 5 black walnuts over here and 2 cherries. Can you come take a look at them? And if they're any count, you send in a triaxle with a picker on the back, like a log truck, and they may be willing to sell them for whatever dollar value. And instead of just having to haul them away, a log truck can come in and get them if they're in a place where a log truck can get to.
Yeah, and maybe another question I get from landowners, of course, after the logging company goes out, there's always going to be tree chops and limbs and such. Is there anything you put in the contract as far as to have the logging company has to have those stacked in a different area, or actually cut up into some big size manageable pieces if you want to cut it into firewood?
I've seen a couple different ways. The most prevalent that I've seen is probably just knocking the tops down a little bit, so they're not 10 feet up in the air. I've been on some jobs where the landowner had them drag out some tops so he can cut them at a flat level place to cut firewood. If they're clear, like the place I was talking about down in Milton, they pushed everything up into piles, and I don't think on that job they chipped anything, but I think they burned it in big burn piles, and obviously that was done with equipment. They'd push them up a dozer. The excavator would pull out the stumps, and they'd push it on a big pile and burn it. Then they come through and grade it and put their grass seed down and such. But yeah, there's a couple different ways that people do that, and it all depends what you have in the contract, and it all depends what you want when it's done. Do you want pass through there for four to walk through and that kind of thing? And that's all obviously got to spelled out in a contract.
Okay, do you have any more questions, JD?
I think we about covered it. I think we got most everything that I had covered.
All right. I'll add one thing, and you had given, Jay, about the last question you had on your paper was, how important is it to take someone with you when you're cutting trees? That question there, that one there, obviously you want as many people as you can take with you, so you got that much more help and you don't have to do as much. But I think it's very beneficial. My wife especially appreciates it when I at least leave her a note on the table or send her a text saying, hey, I'm going here. I'll be back before dark. That kind of thing, just to give it an idea of where you're at, what you're doing, when you're going to be back. So if something goes south while you're working, at least they know where to look for you.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people needs to do that, even when they're deer hunting, out farming.
Right.
I tell my wife, hey, I'm going to be carrying some hay down to the bottom, just in case I get sideways on the tractor and go over the hill. They at least know where to look for the body. So, I think that's very important.
Yes, I do too.
I think JJ might be froze up here, but I know he's got a couple questions for you too. I know 2 more.
Yeah, Pat, my dad always said there's 2 types of music, country and Western. So we want to know who your favorite country music artist is.
I don't listen to a lot of country music, but if I was going to say anybody, it's got to be Garth Brooks. I saw him in concert a bunch of times, and he was a lot of fun. But I listen to mostly Christian music, but I do like Garth Brooks.
Okay.
But what he's like anymore. But back in the day when I was younger, he was a lot of fun to go see. He really got you fired up.
Yeah, he came to the kind of a little trivia for the Mid-Ohio Valley. There's a little, it's not actually it's Belpre, Ohio, but it's just across the river from Parkersburg.
Yeah,
And right before he hit it big, he played the Belpre Homecoming. I think it was like 1987. I mean, I didn't see it, but there was posters around, and yeah, so that small little festival, he played that, and I think that he even played the Interstate Fair here in Wood County, but that was before he made the big time.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
know a lot of those.
One thing I'll throw out to you, JJ, and when you're logging, there's an OSHA standard that requires you to wear a chainsaw resistant boot. Obviously, nobody that cuts firewood is going to go out and buy a pair of chainsaw resistant boots. There's too much money. You don't have get enough use out of them. But there is Kevlar socks out there. And my daughter bought me a couple pairs of them. They're $20 a piece. Obviously, they're a lot nicer to wear when it's cooler out than in the middle of summer. But if you had a pair of them on it, and I've done it myself, put a chainsaw down through a boot, a boot's not going to stop. A steel toe will stop it, yes. But if you just have a regular pair of boots on, it's going to cut right through it. So maybe investing $20, $25 in a pair of Kevlar socks for the 3 or 4 weekends a year you may cut firewood or whatever you do, even for professional loggers. I think it's just money well spent.
Oh, I've never heard of those. That's a nice tip there, Pat.
Oh,
Kevlar socks.
It's I brought a pair of chaps with me, and I know I think it's getting close, but I don't know if I can, if you can see this. But this chap right here, I came out of a back cut at full revs on a saw, I was cutting timber, and I drove that into my leg at full revs on that saw. It never even cut my jeans. It gets the Kevlar fibers in there I think you understand how it works. It ties up the clutch on the saw and it just stops immediately. So Kevlar it has its place, that's for sure. And it definitely helps. And it's not all Kevlar. I know there's some different types of ballistic nylon, different things. I don't know all the terminology, but one thing I do know from past experiences, it does work.
What's the brand? Is it called Bulletproof Socks?
She gave them to me for Christmas, so I couldn't tell you.
or where did they order those from? Like Cabela's or?
I don't know where she got them from, to be honest with you. I know some of the trainings that I've done for the different logging outfits around the state, they found them because they'd much rather, for them, in order to fulfill that OSHA standard, the Kevlar sock will fulfill that OSHA standard on the log job, on that end of things. So, and like I said, it's a lot better than buying a $300, $350 or $400 pair of boots that you're only going to use, very few times in a year's time, and still have the protection.
Nice. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Dickies and Field and Stream has Kevlar socks, it looks like.
Yep, Lisa found those and put them in the chat.
Okay.
And Audra did back up your claim, JJ. Garth did play the Interstate Fair.
Yeah. Big Garth.
And Scalson, he had in his contract, he had the logger make sure that all the slash had to be waist level or lower. So that's all we have in the chat box for today.
Cool. Hey, Pat, we really appreciate you coming on the program, and we have learned a lot, especially about safety tips and anything to do with cutting firewood and timber safety. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You're more than welcome anytime.
Yep.
So we'll if we get some questions, we will send them your way. It'd be better to just send them an email or have them call you.
I can do either.
Okay, and what's your email?
You asked me too quick, JJ. Patrick Donnelly 1, the numeral 1, at mail.wvu.edu.
Okay, and that's great. And I just want to remind everyone that programs and activities by WVU Extension are available to all persons without regard to race, color, sex, disability, religion, age, veteran status, political belief, sexual orientation, national origin, and marital or family status. Mountaineer Farm Talk is a program of WVU Extension, Agriculture, and Natural Resources. And we thank everyone for tuning in today. You want to go ahead and sign us off, JD?
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you for joining in the Mountaineer Farm Talk, the voice of West Virginia agricultural. Till next time, we'll see you around the ridge.